Today's guest comes from international waters. We absolutely love his work and love working with him, so we thought we'd get him on to chat all things design. So welcome Dan Beltran, also known as Design with Dan.
The one and only. Yes. Thank you guys so much for having me on. We're what, 3 years into this friendship now? It's been a while.
Yeah, about 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah.
First came across your work on Instagram and reached out whilst we were at the NRL and worked on a few projects there, and stayed in touch ever since.
3 years is, I feel
The
like
rest is
that's
history.
long-term relationship status there.
Yeah, it's
Getting
decent.
there?
It's decent. It's worth it.
We're almost Facebook official. We're just
Oof.
creeping around the corner there. So yeah.
Ooh,
So where are you in the wonderful world of
the
sports
world.
design? Are
Everywhere.
you New Zealand?
Yeah.
You America? What's happening?
Yeah, so right now I'm just finishing a 6 month stint here in New Zealand. Decided to pack up all my bags and come check out this beautiful country that's basically on the other side of the world from my hometown of San Francisco. And so I'm born and raised California Bay Area, and I've just been here exploring and essentially packed up my stuff into a suitcase, and I'm headed back home now. So I'm internationally, kind of jumping, but it's what it's all about. So
For sure. So, give
yeah.
us a little bit of an intro or insight into who Dan is and how you started your design journey.
Yeah, so obviously my name is Dan Beltran. I went to Gonzaga University and I have a degree in public relations and marketing. And alongside getting that degree, I kind of was part of a few different clubs and organizations on campus. And there was this huge design need that I had kind of established and seen presence. And so I ended up teaching myself graphic design on the side, fell in love with it, continued to just get opportunity after opportunity, and really delved into this craft that I love, right? And so after that, after graduation, I worked for a sock company for a little while doing line sheets. It was like just the first graphic design job that I could get, just promo stuff they'd shoot out to vendors. And then from there, I worked in house at a property real estate management firm where I was their like lead creative for a bunch of different properties across the states, which consisted of site visits, audits essentially of brand awareness and how it was going in the region, and recommendations from that point. And then I branched into my true love, which is sports, and I got my first role as a junior designer for the Seattle Sounders, based in Seattle, Washington. And the rest is just history. Fell in love. I've always loved sports. I've always loved sports design, and so worked there for a while. I've been down in San Diego at an agency called STN Digital. Been fortunate enough to go back to work for my alma mater, Gonzaga, for a time, and have been freelance since going on 3 years now, 2020, and have just loved every single step of the way.
Wow, it's amazing how many self-taught sports designers there are out there in the world, absolutely killing it at the moment. Like, a lot of students, at school and looking to finish degrees, they all think, you have to do 3 years, 4 years at university, and it's not always the case, especially nowadays with the internet.
Have you topped
Yeah.
up obviously your self-taught knowledge? Have you complemented that with any kind of official degree or official like learning, or you just literally continue to self-teach throughout your whole career so
Yeah.
far?
I'm a big proponent. I don't think you should skimp out on education if you have the opportunity to be able to go. If it, I think it teaches you how to learn in a way. But obviously, there's so many resources out there. But yeah, I personally, the proof is in the pudding. I just kind of lean on my portfolio, and I'm always learning and always looking for new courses, and nothing official. I'm not like Adobe certified or anything like that. But
You're
yeah,
doing all right. I think you're doing a good job.
Very good, very good job.
thank you.
So Dan, you're working internally at organisations. I sort of want to talk to you about taking the plunge from full-time work, working for a business, and going into freelance, and how that came about. What risks you took, what made you make that decision, all those sort of components to taking that plunge.
Definitely. Yeah. So I was in house at Gonzaga University as their director of creative services back in 2020, pre COVID, right as COVID was hitting. I believe I was there for a little under a year. And when COVID hit, everything froze. Everybody was in a complete standstill pattern. We have no idea what's going to happen. At first, you're hearing, it's going to be 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, 2 months have gone by. And nobody really knows what's going on. And so my workload dropped off completely. I had nothing to do, but I was still getting a salary, still getting a paycheck. And so I took it upon myself to put out a few different just keep the sword sharp, as I say. And I just wanted to practice and get some composites out there, knowing that, eyes are online, everybody's on social, nobody's going to in-person events anymore. And in the process of doing that, I ended up just getting attention from different teams and organizations for opportunities to be hired in house. I was a little unsure at the time about moving because I had just relocated a little under a year ago from San Diego all the way up to Spokane, Washington. It was a huge jump. And so I wasn't really looking to relocate. And so in the process of turning down some of these offers, specifically University of Southern California, USC, they were like, "Hey, like we can't get you in house, but is it possible for us to freelance with you? We'd love to kind of take you on." And I was like, "Okay." Like I had never really thought about freelancing before. While I was in house, I try to keep it pretty above board, especially on those kinds of instances. But it was a different sport, different school. We didn't have a football team, and I was like, "Okay, cool." And so I just kind of started taking on freelance work on the side while I was working in house and while my work had all come to a standstill, having already been ahead for the season and all these different things in my actual role. I was just twiddling my thumbs. And so it got to a point personally where I was taking on so much freelance work that it didn't make fiscal sense for me to stay in my role. And so after a few months of deliberation, I ended up just pulling the trigger and going full time freelance. And I call it independent, going independent full time. It's something that's been my goal since I started off as a designer way back when. And I think that I've always been kind of an independent spirit. It's been the best decision I've ever made. The scariest, just because, you sacrifice a consistent paycheck for you don't you sing for your supper as a freelancer. There's no guarantee when the next paycheck's going to come in. You're only as good as your last project. You're only as good as the relationships that you've built. And so it was a huge risk that I didn't take lightly, but ultimately I knew it was what I wanted to do, and I knew it was something that there was just no other way I could do it. So
How hard is that initial part of going freelance, scrapping for jobs and trying to find work to, put food on the table and pay rent and that sort of thing? How stressful is it? Because, a lot of people are scared to move from a full-time role where they get a salary and guaranteed X amount of dollars a month.
yeah, I I always caution people when they ask me about my freelance experience because I think there might be a little bit of survivorship bias at play. I don't want to tell everybody, "Oh yeah, quit your job, go freelance. It'll be fine. It'll work out." Because statistically that's just impossible, right? And so you kind of have to be calculated about it. You really have to think through the process of, am I going to be okay? Do I have enough in the bank to make it happen? Do I have enough um, clientele to make it happen? And ultimately it's your comfortability, your own personal comfortability with risk. And if you want to reduce that risk, then you would want to have more in the bank. You'd want to have more guarantees. And if you're, where I was, and I was just so sick of, doing what I was doing at the time, granted, and wanting that freedom and wanting that desire to basically be my own boss, it wasn't really an option. It was just that was the only decision to be made. And so I it's harder and easier than you think because as soon as you announce the intention, the entire world kind of forms around you to help support you, which is awesome. And I'm so grateful to have this community that I'm surrounded by. But it doesn't work that way all the time, and it isn't a guarantee that as soon as you say that you're going to go freelance, that people are going to be lining up all the time. And so I think there's a lot of work that you have to do on the back end as far as relationship building, as far as building those connections, as far as just organically getting to know people in your field. So then that way, when the opportunity comes up, that it's going to make sense.
Yeah, so how did you, I guess, market your services and build your own professional or personal brand?
Yeah, it's a slow burn. It's kind of, that you picture the frogs that you just slightly turn up the temperature each millisecond each time, and pretty soon you got a boiling pot. It's not something that happens overnight. I get a lot of DMs on social media for people asking me, how do I get the big flashy cool clients? How do I get these opportunities? And a lot of it really comes down to just patience and persistence and consistency. The I've picked up a little bit of a quip, but the quick route to success is the long route, and there's no there's no way to cut corners in this industry. It really comes down to just being consistent with your word, being consistent with your output, and consistently delivering a high quality product. Because at the end of the day, there's no guarantee. Like, it could all dry up, right? And so I think that it really does come down to that.
It's interesting that you say that you had have a marketing, I think marketing PR degree or something along those lines. I didn't know that about you, but we've always said that working with you feels extremely professional. It feels really, easy. Like, you maintain a level of professionalism in a space where it's a creative world. Like, you come across all different types of people, but we find that your output as a freelancer and as a creative provider is top of the crop in terms of relationship management, stakeholder management, client management. And so it's interesting to hear that potentially stems from you having an understanding of how marketing and PR and that works in terms of being able to manage client relationships. Do you think that is beneficial to you managing your own business now, knowing those kind of, fundamentals?
I don't think it hurts. I don't think that it's a core proponent to my career. I would say it really just comes down to the type of human that you are. I was this way before I had my degree. I was this way before I had any type of formal education. I'm an over communicator. I try to put myself into the client's shoes a lot because I know there's a lot of ego in this field, and I know there's a lot of unnecessary holier than thou attitude that can kind of happen. And I don't think that's right. And I personally, I view you guys as my friends, and obviously we have a professional relationship as well, which I honor. But ultimately it really comes down to the type of person that you are. I, throughout my life, have just been that kind of person. And especially, my eyes were open to it when I was working in-house at STN Digital. We interfaced with a lot of freelance creatives, and you kind of would see people who bend over backwards to make stuff happen, and then you see the people who make it a living hell to work with you on a daily basis. And the talent range is across the board for each of those categories. But I always found myself personally going back to the people who were easy to work with over potentially somebody who was like a superstar, but had the ego the size of, Australia.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah, we've definitely had to turn people away in that respect. They're some of the best technical creative designers that we've seen. But yeah, just the ego and the working relationship is, you just can't operate like that in this industry. We see a lot of jealousy. We see a lot of ego driven kind of commentary and, shutting people down and just pure blatant online bullying around people getting opportunities that other people aren't getting. And it's just not beneficial to anyone. It's an industry that, is very small, and there's just no place. There's no place for ego and jealousy in it, I don't think, from a top tier freelance point of view. And we tend to make sure that we're working with the ones that are supportive, professional, easy to get along with as well. So yeah, definitely echo your thoughts there.
I mean, one thing I love about you, Dan, is you sort of mentioned it just before, you over communicate. And even when there's, if say you've got a project or you're working on a project for us, you may be delivering it in, a week or 2 weeks time, but you'll also give us an update in 3 days. Okay, hey guys, I might have some time tomorrow to get through this and this, expect this by, COB today. Like, even when you don't have something to communicate or an update to give, you still be able to give us an update.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that came from my time again at the agency. Over communication is always 100% of the time better than under communication, and I think a lot of times designers live in a bubble that it's just person who's paying me money and me, the artist, and the person who's paying me. But I would say 100% of the time, there's other stakeholders involved. You guys are turning around and talking to clients. Those clients have bosses that they're also talking to. There's things that shift and move and constantly evolve at all times. And so, in my opinion, I don't see why it wouldn't make sense to constantly communicate just so that you have an idea of what's happening. Because the worst case scenario for me would be to keep you guys in the dark, and then you guys are getting shade from somebody who's paying you, and then it's not good. And so if it comes down to going dark for a week versus, hey, I'll have an update for you Tuesday so that you're aware, and then you can prime up an email to send over to your people, it just makes logical sense to me. I don't see how you could do it any other way.
I think your business smarts is something that, as I mentioned, like the communication side of things. But I also think, you know, it comes across in you when we're working with you to put together pitches or put together proposals for clients. You're very forthcoming with information that helps us put the best kind of foot forward in those processes. There's been clients that we've worked on and it's got down to the stage with hundreds of revisions back and forth, and you've kind of been like, hey guys, let's reel it in, let's kind of go back to the client and figure out what's still expected, what the scope of work look like, and you do try and keep things really tight, really on track, really matter of fact. And it's refreshing when I work with you as well, in that sense, when I'm like on the hamster wheel and you kind of like reel me in. And then obviously we're able to portray that professionalism onto the client. So yeah, I think that just being aware that there is always a middleman, and if you're a freelancer and you're not dealing directly with the client, there is going to be that communication process that needs to happen. And if you're not making that easy, if you're not simplifying that for the middleman, there's going to be some, fallout, and you'll end up having to do more revisions because we haven't managed that together properly. And, you just make more work for yourself. So yeah, that's
Right.
a really big side of it. I think when you're looking at freelance and design, freelance design, you're not just a designer. You do actually have to manage a business,
Yeah.
manage relationships, and do
100%.
lots of things. And I feel like that's where people are getting let down at the moment. But you're definitely nailing the both sides. So yeah, we
Thank you.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
I wanted to quickly touch on your creative process, and I think we've spoken about this a couple of times before as well. But designers, everyone goes through their own process. But I think we've even spoken about the fact that they're on your end is potentially like a few steps you go through no matter what the brief looks like in order to get yourself prepared to begin that work. So I'd love to know what those steps are, and how you kind of get a brief in whatever format it is, digest it, and what are you doing before
Yeah.
you're even kind of putting pen to paper, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah. Pen to paper. Yeah. So I guess touching on that specifically, touching on the whole communication thing, I find that most projects that are successful require a huge amount, or just even a normal amount of communication up front to just establish expectations, and to be able to say, okay, here's what I'm going to deliver you, here's what you are expecting, here's what will qualitate this project as a success. And getting those answers before you begin is so huge. And so for my creative process, a lot of it comes down to what is going to make this project a success. um, how are we going to be communicating throughout this project? What line of communication? Some people prefer WhatsApp. I text you guys occasionally. We've got email. It just really depends. Each client has their own individual workflow, and I try and fit into those to ease that layer between getting the work done and the brief out. But yeah, so a good brief, huge from the start. It's extremely helpful if a client comes with it, just because I know that communication has occurred between whoever you guys might be interfacing with and myself, and I know that those questions have been answered. But yeah, a lot of it comes down to just getting the information up front as much as possible. And then you go into mood boarding to establish a common graphic language, a visual language, so that way you know what you're going to get. Ultimately, 99% of issues that you run into in the creative space is just communication, right? And saying, okay, you want this logo to be bigger. Well, how much bigger? Because bigger, how long is a piece of string, right? Like I can make it as big or as small. So really nailing in the granular details, it helps me. I'm gonna be honest with you. Can I like cuss on here? I don't know. Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah, of course.
I'm lazy as
More.
shit. I'm lazy as shit, right? Like I'm super lazy. And so for me, getting all of that information saves me from having to just back and forth, and now this is extending for another day because you're out of office, and this person's at a baby shower, whatever the hell the case is. I am lazy and I need all the information in an email so that I can read it and just refer back to it. My memory, I just turned 30, it's leaving me. I'm going to be just gone in a few years here, so just getting it all on a paper helps me immensely.
I'd call that proactive
And
or
so
using your initiative.
yeah, yeah. However you want to define it, but yeah, I think that yeah, and then it just kind of comes down to okay, through each step of the process, here's where we're getting. A lot of it, I like to consider myself somewhat of a translator. I'm sure you guys do too, an interpreter of sorts, because you get a wall of text, and then you're like, okay, how am I going to break this down to be able to send it to a designer so that they can make what we know that they can, and I feel the same way. I'm an interpreter. When I get that wall of text, I'm like, okay, they want something flashy, they want something clean, but they want it to be bold, but also reserved. I'm like, okay, what's the actual solution going to be here? And so there's a lot of just reading between the lines that you have to do, and
There's a
yeah, just
definite
going back to the
creative
whole
language that needs to happen. I mean, that's all
yeah,
Reese's. Reese is
yes,
our creative interpreter, but it does take a specific skill, I think, to be able to take, yeah, exactly, a text or someone who's not in a creative field and they think that they know what they want, but to be able to get that, draw that actually out of them into a format that makes sense for you to be able to then go, okay, this now needs to come, this wall of text now needs to come across in a visual capacity. That is not an easy thing to do. So yeah, that is definitely like as part of your process is what you're saying is you're trying to get all of
yeah,
those factors that potentially could change the output of the visual product
yep,
up front, so you
yep.
that kind of stuff is taken out of your creative thinking and you can focus on actually bringing to life the elements that require a creative input. So yeah, I think that's powerful.
Like client feedback's obviously, an integral part of the process, like design process. So, sometimes you're going to nail it straight away. Sometimes you have multiple revisions. How do you incorporate client feedback without sort of ruining or wanting to maintain the integrity of your creative vision?
That's a great question. I think in my younger years, it's a huge ego hit. How am I going to come back from this? The client doesn't like my work, but it happens, and it happens a lot more than you'd think. And I think the longer that you progress throughout your career, the less it happens, or you just kind of become better at knowing what they're looking for before they even realize what they're looking for. Um, a lot of times, you're signing my paycheck. Like you're the person who, at the end of the day, wants a specific result. And I think a lot of creatives get into this mindset that everything that they create has to be a portfolio piece, which just is not the case. And sometimes it's not pretty and it's a little dirty, but you got to just get your elbows out and you just kind of have to grind through it. And it's not always going to be great. And you're not always, I've dumped my fair share of clients. I don't get along with everybody, and you have to figure out, does it make sense? Is it going to help push the project forward? Is it going to give the project, a successful reading at the end of the day? And sometimes you just kind of have to do what you got to do.
Where do you actually find your inspiration for generating fresh ideas? Because the sports design landscape is so full of amazing designers and a lot of competition and similar look and feels. Are you looking to other sports designers? Are you looking in completely different fields like entertainment, music, events, that sort of like, where are you spending your time ideating and finding these pieces of inspiration?
I am of the firm belief that if all we ever looked at was sports design, it would become an echo chamber. And my personal stance is that it already is an echo chamber. So I think that it's important to be able to find inspiration from the outside world. At the end of the day, for me, I draw on personal experience. And so if I go out and I'm inspired by, I'd go take the railway somewhere and I see an incredible view, it makes me want to create something. And it's the emotion, it's the undescribable kind of like, oh, I blacked out and then it was just this awesome piece that kind of, happened in front of me. There's really no formula to it, I would say, other than I think a lot of creatives get boxed in with wanting to make something that's going to be generally accepted, which then ends up turning out like a lot of other creative has turned out. And I think that the best thing you could ever do, Pharrell teaches this in music, is to just be the best version of you and not the best version of anything that you're seeing out there. And so yeah, so I do take a lot of inspiration from cinematic like movie posters. I just love it. I would love to get into movie posters. In the long term, it's something that I find so fascinating to be able to condense the entire story of a full feature length movie into one single image is kind of like a magic to me. Um, and then the rest of it is really just experience. If I'm it's a therapy. It's a form of therapy for me. And if I'm, upset or angry one day, I kind of channel that into a graphic. If I'm, feeling a little wondrous or feeling a little bit creative or curious, then that kind of comes through, and it's just having fun at the end of the day. It's supposed to be fun. We push pixels for a living, right? Like we're not rocket scientists. I'm just trying to have fun out here.
Love it. How hard is it, to strike a balance between, existing trends, but also remaining unique to yourself?
I think subconsciously we all take in and we all consume and we all have ideas that, we think are original, but they've been done a million times just as a result of participating in the space that we do. And so I don't think it's avoidable to be able to make something that I don't think there is such thing as originality. I think that everything's been done to a certain degree and the rest is just riffs. And so from that perspective, I know a lot of people who, will pull up reference and kind of make according to that. My personal head against the wall method is just experimenting, and it's really chaotic and random, and just there's no rhyme or reason, which sometimes makes it difficult to remake something if it's part of a series. And so I'm trying to streamline that a little bit, but yeah, it really just comes down to like how you operate on an individual level, I'd say.
Yeah. What I'd be interested to know, where's the craziest place you've or the where you've drawn inspiration from?
COVID. COVID. The whole world is falling apart. Everybody's freaking out. Nobody knows what their job is going to look like. And I was sitting looking at my portfolio and I was just like, man, I hate this. Like, I know I can do better. This isn't the best work that I can do. And I just kind of went into the lab, for a few weeks, and I made some stuff that I'm incredibly proud of in a time where I saw a lot of people, unsure, freaking out. I don't know what to do. And to me, it was just I thrive in those types of environments where things are not, going according to plan, or when you get thrown, it's about how you adapt. Life. Let's get philosophical here. Life is about how you adapt to what you're thrown, right? And so for me, I really enjoy differing perspectives and being able to say, okay, hey, this seems this way, but how can we turn this into a positive?
Yeah, I feel like the best creatives, made use of that uncertain world and tried to, like, they were trying to make, you're trying to make sense of it, right? As a creative, that's what you're trying to do
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
putting something, visually out there. You're trying to make sense of either a brief or a feeling or an emotion or, something that someone's asked you to make sense of. And that was a time where nothing made sense and no one could make any sense of it. And you had a lot of spare time. So obviously, as a creative mind, that was what was ticking over, and you guys creatively were trying to make sense of that. So I'm not surprised that happened. But obviously, some people went the other way and shut down their creative capabilities because they couldn't handle it. But I think the ones that
And that's fine.
yeah,
Yeah. That's the beauty of the human complex, is we all just kind of react to things differently, and it's
absolutely.
just go
What
with what
makes us
feels
human.
natural.
We talk a lot about typography and text and hierarchy of design, and we work with a lot of designers who are like you, self-taught, in that kind of early phase of their career, just learning what their style is and what they want to kind of portray as their visual identity. We're seeing a lot of barriers at the moment in those that are self-taught in being able to visually communicate text and wording and what's the word, typography, right?
Yeah. Use of font,
Sure.
placement,
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear about your process in terms of like overlaying text and typography, and how you kind of prioritize the hierarchy of messaging in your and if there's any like advice you could give to these people who are struggling with that, because there's a lot of them that do really great design but they just can't nail that final piece of the puzzle,
Yeah.
which is
It's huge. Yeah, it's like anything in the world. There's different use cases for the type of impact that you're wanting to have. I would say um, less is more. That's my personal philosophy. I think that a lot of younger creatives try to overdo it by doing too much. And I think, to me, there's certain individuals in the field who use type so strikingly and so intentional that it really is more profound than just slapping a huge typeface across the screen with the player's name. And so, yeah, there's fundamental principles of just, tension, symmetry, hierarchy, as far as there's a whole subsect of graphic design as far as how many characters need to be on a line of text before it goes down to the next line. How far are you able to read from left to right in a book before your eyes begin to strain and then you lose interest and then you can't focus. And so there's this whole psychology around type usage, um, ratios for headings versus subheadings, and a lot of that doesn't necessarily come into play. Rules are meant to be broken, right? Like at the end of the day, it's whatever fits the creative the best. But leaning on those fundamental typography, that to me is what separates a good designer from a great designer, is the ability to command type, and among a few other things. But yeah, and so there's not I have to I haven't come across, like a really phenomenal, like, oh, this is the resource that I need to be checking out for typography. I have a bunch of books. I have a bunch of PDFs on, a Dropbox folder that lays somewhere in the depths of my computer, and I refer to it every now and then, just as far as typographical structure and things of that nature. So I encourage people to read it, or read up on it and study it and learn it, because it's not necessarily just great. Let's throw a typeface across. It's not going to work.
Yeah, I feel like they spend more time, it's interesting that there's a psychology and a science and an actual education around it, because
Yeah.
I feel like they probably spend more time trying to figure out the other layers of design and not really realizing that that is the part that's letting them down in creating like a really amazing piece
Yeah.
that sets them apart from the rest. So I think that it's a great point. Like if you can read up on it and learn about it and understand it and take it into the creative process, I think it'll only benefit the output.
Yeah, I feel it's a bit of an Achilles heel for the young designers. They'll come up with a really amazing graphic or piece of art, and then at the very end they'll add on some text, whether it's game details with time, date, stadium, a sponsor logo. They'll just slap everything on at the end once the design's done, and it's the just integration. You can just tell just isn't where it should be. I'd be interested to know, like,
Yep.
how do you approach it in terms of not only hierarchy, but what do you do first, or does it literally depend on what the brief is and what you're creating? Do you focus on where you're going to put the font and first, or
Yeah. I get what you're saying. I typically
They're
end
asking
up.
you for all your trade
So
secrets, Dan.
yeah, no, that's fine. I hope everybody's taking notes. For me, I operate at a very straightforward psychological level on anything that I create. If there's a human in it, we as humans like to see other humans. So make the human the big thing, right? And then as far as hierarchy of needs informationally goes, the next thing you're going to look for. So it's like who, what, when, where, why, literally, right? And so from that, you go to what, which is typically the type. So in my opinion, there's how long is a piece of string? It depends on what you're doing. Then it would go to type. And I like to make use of grids in my compositions. And so I'll just set a few what I call perimeter grids to just lay the bounding kind of safe space, so to speak. I don't like to have anything touching the edges a lot of the times. And it's just kind of massaging it from there. What's going to fit the comp, what feels right. You have the hierarchy of information with the heading, subheading, any detailed type. And then I've seen a lot of people recently, and I guess since the history of time, using type as almost a creative asset, that doesn't necessarily serve an informational purpose. It's just meant to add flourish to the comp. And so, yeah, I people and then type for me. Really, really depends. Sometimes I'm like, okay, great, type is the thing here, and then the people are second. But
yeah, I like it.
I do. I think it's a good formula for people who are struggling to figure out where to begin with briefs to start to work through. And as you said, it's not going to fit all briefs, but it's definitely going to give you a starting point and ease your like concerns about responding to a brief by knowing that you've got some kind of structure or template to at least begin to start the process if you're feeling like creative block or whatever. Like some things, as you would know, you'll get a brief and something will come to you straight away, and other things you'll get a brief and you'll sit there for 3 days and not even touch it and feel like lose sleep and feel like you're not going to be able to achieve it, and then something will just come to you. So I think that's definitely a good shout. Learn about the different stuff, educate yourself on it, and then try and follow a process if you're getting into some kind of creative block that might unlock your You're thinking, sorry.
Right. And ultimately, in the world we live in the social media realm that we operate in, there's a very small window that you have in order to capture attention, as you guys know. And so being able to capitalize on that in whatever way that means to you, if the type is lost and it's too small, I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to sit here and like, as much as I want to think that everybody's going to comb through and look at every detail of this beautiful masterpiece that I've made, the fact of the matter is it's going to be seen for like 4 seconds on a social feed and they're going to swipe it with their thumb and keep going. So if I can't get the primary information across in that time frame, I failed. Think of it like a billboard you're driving by. Like you got to get the information there, or you're just going to lose it.
How do you adapt your artwork or creative for different mediums? You know, you mentioned billboards. You know, obviously social graphics is, you know, a main focus, but you know, the out of house advertising, merchandise, all that type of those sorts of mediums. Is it a different approach for each platform?
I make my so to start, I do something that's a little unorthodox. I make my any of my composites that I create, unless a client specifically requests for a specific dimension set, I make my graphics huge. Just in case, because to me that makes sense to have it be as transferable as possible into any medium. You know, I've worked with you on a project where a client was like, "Hey, you know, this was originally going to be a paid ad on social media, and now we want to make it a poster." You know, and then you're like, "Oh crap!" Because if you don't plan for that from the start, you have to recreate it, which is a time suck. And so for me, I always try to create as big as possible, which puts priority on me having, you know, gear that can handle large file formats. And that is something that's important to me, just in the event that, you know, hey, we loved this so much, we want to blow it up on the side of a billboard, even though you originally only made it to be an Instagram carousel swipe, you know. So it's just planning. If you have the hardware to be able to handle that, I always recommend it, just because you never know. Work in smart objects, always, never rasterize unless never. Actually, yeah, never rasterize. You should never rasterize.
He's working smarter, not harder.
Yeah,
Love it.
fair call. On the
Yes.
hardware, I mean,
Yes.
I can't quite see it at the moment, but I know you usually have a pretty banging home setup. What are your
Yes.
non-negotiables for your home office?
Oh man. Yeah. So beauty of being a freelancer is that I don't have to wait for IT or HR to get back to me, you know, to buy the baseline MacBook Pro.
Or Toyota use
I've worked
Windows?
both. Yeah, exactly. I've worked in both environments, in Windows and Mac. Right now I'm rocking I think it's a Mac Studio. It's like the M1 Ultra. It's got like 128 gigabytes of RAM. I like to I am the type of individual. It is completely overkill. So don't get me wrong. I just am the type of individual who doesn't want to worry about a computer lagging. I don't want to ever have to deal with that. I want to be able to just blindly say, yes, I can handle it. And so to me, that's important because I've ran into issues in the past where I've been working on a tight deadline with a computer that wasn't up to snuff. And my anxiety skyrockets. It affects the way that I communicate just because I've wasted hours waiting for a computer to load. And I spited myself, or I was spited in that instance so much that I was like, screw it. We're going balls to the wall every time. So,
There's enough unknown in the world. You don't need to be worrying about
yeah.
whether your computer's going to work for you
No.
to be able to deliver.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, Dan, obviously working in sport for a period of time, what is it about sport that that you love in terms of design? You obviously said you would love to go into the music side, the movie side at some point, but for
And
sports
music,
design,
yeah.
yeah, movies. So sports design specifically, what is it that you're loving about sport, and who are the clients that you're kind of working with at the moment?
Yeah. So, sport to me is the most unique intersection in the world of passion from the fan side and the team side. It's like a common ground that you can rally with, and no matter where you are in the world, it just brings people together, and I love that passion. You can't really, no diss to, you know, folks who work at Microsoft or, you know, Google. You can't really like I'm not gripped by the latest HoloLens, you know. I don't care about that. I like tech, but I love the rags to riches stories of a guy who trained and he worked as a burger flipper, 6 months ago, and now he's the starting whatever wherever. I love that. I love the storytelling aspect of it. I love the fan side of things. And I think that the community is so unique because a lot of folks are just former athletes themselves, and I think that it's cool to just be in this immersive, always changing, always passionate environment, because that's the one thing you can guarantee about sports is that people are very passionate and they are not afraid to let you know. And so, yeah, I love that. I love that aspect of it.
And the clients that you're working with in the sporting landscape at the
Yes.
moment, so what does that look like for you, and
Yes.
what is your kind of makeup of clientele currently?
Oh man. It is all over the place. So I work as part of a larger group called Zero G. It's a group that I had founded. We call ourselves the Avengers of Sports Design, kind of cheeky. But we all work together on a number of awesome projects. With clients from around the globe. I think we've just locked in with Fanatics Sports Betting, which is awesome. I hope that I'm allowed to say that. If not, then we can strike that. But we work with awesome clients from around the globe, which is super fun. It's always a new and unique challenge. And then me personally, in my spare time, I work with you guys. Obviously, shout out Sports Design Australia.
I know a lot of young Australian designers, follow you on Instagram and look up to you. Who else is in the industry that I guess you look up to or have been inspired by over the last, 5-10 years? And how important also is collaboration? Because I feel like a lot of designers feel like they're competing against each other, but there's so many opportunities for designers to come together and collaborate, whether it's independent and independent or independent and agency. I'd be keen to hear your
Yeah.
thoughts on that side of things.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to work with clients on just about every continent, and collaborate with individuals, from France, from Brazil, from Australia. And it's so cool to be able to see this global community of creatives who all come together under the same umbrella of just passion and love for what they do. I haven't met anybody who's like not into sports design, but working in sports design. You kind of have to have a passion for it. And so, from that perspective, I have just so much admiration for folks. You're asking me to kind of name my favorite child right now. I couldn't pick. There's just so many incredible people. If you plug into the hashtag SM Sports, on Instagram or social media, Twitter, wherever, just being able to participate in that global aspect of camaraderie is something that I hold very near and dear. Obviously, I'm living in New Zealand for the time being, and the career that I've been able to forge has allowed me to do that, which I'm so grateful for. But yeah, I think overall, it's easy to get lost in the trap that we're all working against each other. I think the opposite. I think that we all should work together. I think we all do work together. And it's a lot easier. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, is kind of how I approach it. And I think that there's more than enough work for everybody in the industry. There's more than enough opportunities. There's not a shortage. We're not going to run out. And so for me, I always try to uplift anybody that I can, just because it's the right thing to do, and it's what I would have wanted to have done or have happened in my starting off in my career. And it's easy to, if you're not getting picked for stuff and your posts aren't doing as well as you want them to be, and you're not making enough money, um, you can point the finger at just about anywhere that you want, but ultimately it kind of comes back to you, and it's a personal responsibility thing. If you're not where you're at in your life, you can blame other people all you want. That's all I have to say, and so I've always adhered to the MJ mentality, the Kobe mentality of just like, if I'm not winning, that's on me. Like, I have to do better. I have to improve. I need to be the marketing by definition is being the obvious choice amongst competition. And so I work every day to try to be the obvious choice. And it's something that I love, and I'm grateful to do what I love every day. But definitely, I don't have a lot of time or patience for people who get ugly with the competition side of things, and I think that we should all be helping each other as much as we can.
I think you've absolutely nailed it there, Dan. And on that note, with all the philosophical bits and pieces that you've put across, I think there's some awesome pieces in there about, just how designers can prioritize what they, the self-taught designers especially, what they prioritize in terms of their learning and growth and development. The business side of stuff you've definitely given us, and it's a great insight into you know, how to make a freelance business work and the fundamentals around that. And just generally, we love hearing your insight and your perception on the industry, and just, yeah, you're phenomenal, and we love you and we love your work, and we really appreciate you coming and
mutual.
joining us today. So thanks so
course.
much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to just hang out and love talking this stuff. So
Oh, good. Well, we appreciate it. So thanks so much, and have a safe trip back to the US, and we'll chat to you soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
Dan. See ya.